Okay, good afternoon, everybody. You're welcome to Unuka Attorneys and Solicitors webinar on the constitutional issues around national protests. It is going to be in the form of a debate, and the debate is as to whether there are lawful limits to protests. The debate will be on the Constitution, young people, and national development. Before we kick off, I would like to deal with some housekeeping rules. First, to welcome you to this important webinar, and then to note that the discussions will be in the form of a debate. We urge participants to use the Q&A function on the Zoom to send their questions to the panelists. I would like to mention that this webinar is informational only, and the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. If you desire legal advice, you would have to establish a client relationship with the firm and contact the firm. The time allotted for this webinar is approximately 1 hour, 15 minutes. We will endeavor as much as possible to keep to the time frame. Let me speak a little about Unuka Attorneys and Solicitors. We are a leading global law firm working with our clients for solutions. We have 3 offices in Nigeria with connections to other law firms across the globe through our membership of Lawyers Associated Worldwide, a network of international law firms. We have 5 partners and over 40 lawyers. We are involved in 12 sectors of the economy, and we have 16 practice areas. So today, we'll be following this agenda. There will be an introduction, which I will do, and then I will discuss the theoretical basis for government involvement in youth development, and then I will discuss lay out the problem or the questions, and then there will be a panel debate. I will introduce the panelists at the time of the panel debate, and following the debate, we may proceed to consider other issues, such as the challenges, etc. In terms of introduction, in 1985, the United Nations pledged to the World Program of Action for Youths and identified education. The goal is to improve the level of basic education, skill training, and literacy among all youth, including young women and youth in distressed circumstances. Having identified education as the greatest impediment to the full development of youths. In 1999, the United Nations General Assembly, on the recommendation of the World Conference of Ministers of States, different states, responsible for youth, declared August 12 the International Youth Day. And usually the International Youth Day is an opportunity to celebrate the youth and listen to their voices, actions, and creativities, as well as their universal and independent engagement. Now, over the years, as youth engagement has been waning, education has been identified as a priority in fostering youth engagement, which will inadvertently promote economic growth and sustainable development, as well as eradicate poverty and hunger. Now, 10.6% of the world's youth, those aged between 15 and 24, are illiterate. In the last decade, about 71 million adolescents were not in any school of any type. Further to this, 20% of all the youth in the developing world are not in education, employment, or training. Knowledge and education are key factors to the full and effective participation of youths in the process of social, economic, and political development. And you see the United Nations statistics on this. And this has been complicated by COVID-19 pandemic, which has had serious impact. 1.5 billion learners are out of school right now because of the pandemic. And 184 countries have school closures impacting 87.6% of enrolled learners. So that's the statistics. The situation is very grim for our youth, and it's not peculiar to Nigeria. It's a problem all over the world. So what's the theoretical basis for government involvement in youth engagement and development? There are many theories. The basic theory that we all know that we started from, the foundation, is the social contract theory, which postulates that there's a social contract between the state and the people. And under that contract, the people give up their right to rule themselves and use any means, including violence, to rule themselves, to the government. They yield it to the government. In return, the government protects them. But the role of government is limited, as government is only involved in protection of life and property and nothing else. And that is what you will see with people like Tom Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, you know. But you would find that there are other writers who have criticized that concept, such as Austin, Maine, and Brown, that the role of government should not be just limited to protection of life and property, and that the government needs to do more. So you find the functionalist theory is the other opposing theory to the concept of the social contract. And that says that government should be a source of good to the people and provide welfare programs for the people. And the Canadian John Willis is one of those that push this concept. And as a result, you find government has to do more, like invest in education, housing, etc. This under the social contract theory, government has no business giving employment to people, giving them education, etc. It should be your own effort, according to the social contract theory. So there's clearly a tension between legal formalism and functional schools of thought as to how the people's welfare will be improved. The functionalists say that people's welfare should be improved through government action focused on development. The formalists say, no, it is through the freedom of action by the people individually. You should improve yourself. You should go and get yourself an education. You should get yourself a job. You should do everything yourself. So there's disagreement over the meaning of development. And the question is, you know, can you define development as a youth developing himself free from value or ideology? So you have the human capital theory, and Schwartz, you know, contends that nations and society can modernize and develop through investment in its people. In other words, you see the people as capital that you can invest in, and that if you invest in it, just like any other capital, it would grow and produce profit for the society in form of development. And Baker contends that education and training are most important aspect of human capital development. And modernization is part of development for some scholars. And for instance, the Chinese believe so much, they pursue the agenda of modernization, and they put priority to modernization over every other issue. And they suppress many issues around culture, etc., just to focus on modernization because they wanted to leapfrog from where they are to where they want to be. So, uh, of course, higher education is an imperative because the more educated people are, those that drive the society. So it is fundamental to the construction of a knowledge economy which drives economic and social development. So in other words, you can't have an education strategy, without a development strategy. So there's a relationship between the two of them. So what's the problem? So the problem is, how should government engage with the youth as adopted and recommended by the United Nations? Another problem is, how should the youth provide feedback to the government as anticipated by the United Nations, that there should be engagement between the government and the youth, and that there should be a feedback from the youth to the government. And that brings us to the issue of protest. Now, if protests are a way for youth to give feedback to the government, are there limits to the right to protest? And how does the theoretical tension play out with the youth? So to discuss this problem, we have constituted two panels. As I said earlier, it will be in the form of a debate. Panel A will deal with the question that there are no limits on the right to protest. This panel consists of Mrs. Elizabeth Idigbe, who is the managing partner of Punoka Attorneys and Solicitors, and Mr. Mobo Majemite, a senior associate with Punoka Attorneys and Solicitors. Panel B, we made the argument that there are limits to the right to protest. And this panel will consist of Mr. Nnamdi Orago, a partner in Punoka Attorneys and Solicitors, as well as Mr. Adenka Abdusalam, an associate in Punoka Attorneys and Solicitors. We hope that through this debate, we'll be able to draw attention to the various contending issues, and at the end of the debate, they would have 15 minutes each to make their contention, 15 minutes each. And at the end, we'll have a panel discussion. Other members of whom I will introduce would address the issues. And then I would end up looking at the challenges, and we'll see whether solutions can be profiled on how we can continue to build a more perfect union in our country, Nigeria, that is well informed with all the different parties knowing their relative rights. Thank you very much. I will now invite panel A to make their submissions.
Thank you very much. I am Elizabeth Idigbe, as introduced, and I'm leading the panel where I'll be speaking with Mobo on the fact that there are no limits to the right to protest. So I would call on Mobo to do most of the debate, to lead the debate more or less. However, to do the debate. But however, I want to simply say this first. I want to define what is meant by protest, and I think that it's important so we understand when we talk about the fact that we are saying there are no limits to the right to protest by citizens. It's simply the right to gather, to express yourself, to say something concerning what you don't approve of by any authority, government, institution. It's simply a way to show your objection. It's simply a way to say, I want my ideas to be listened to. I'd like changes made. It's simply a way to do this in a peaceful manner, and I emphasize peaceful. And we will be arguing that it is right, these rights are given and enshrined by the Constitution and many other applicable human rights laws and other laws, as the case may be. So Mubo, please go ahead and tell them why we believe that there are no limits to the right to protest. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Idigbe, for setting the premise within which we'll be making forth our submissions. Now, I'll go very quickly to the sources of this right to protest. Mrs. Idigbe has already said what the protest is. It's simply your right to express your dissent, simple and short. What are the sources of this right to protest? We have the Brundtland. So we have sections 39 and 40 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We also have articles 9, 10, and 11 of the African Charter on Human Rights and on Human and People's Rights, the Ratification and Enforcement Act. If I will just read the salient portions of sections 39 and 40 of the Constitution of Nigeria, just so that we can follow. Section 39 says, every person shall be entitled to the freedom of expression, including freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart ideas and information without interference. Very clearly, that's what section 39 says. Section 40 also says, every person shall be entitled to assemble freely and associate with other persons, and in particular, he may form or belong to any political party, trade union, or any other association for the protection of his interests. I already mentioned articles 9, 10, and 11 of the African Charter, the Banjul Charter, if you want. So now we see that there's clearly the constitutional basis for this right to protest. And this constitutional basis has been interpreted and has been enforced in several litigation. You know, we have the locus classicus, if you will, the old case of Dane and African newspapers of Nigeria that was as far back as 1990. It was again and reiterated in Okafor and in Toka by the Court of Appeal in 2017. So we see this repeated ideology being enforced by the courts that every citizen has this right to protest. So if we agree now that a citizen has the right to protest, right? Should there be limits, or are there limits to this protest? And I would argue very strongly that in as much as there is section 45 of the Constitution, which says that in the interest of public safety, public morality, that the government could come in, I would argue very strongly that insofar as the right to protest is being exercised within the law, as long as it is exercised within the law, within the ambits of the law, that there should be no interference whatsoever. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by within the law is that there shouldn't be an excessive, there shouldn't be an infringement, not there shouldn't be an excessive, there shouldn't be an infringement on the rights of other people, because we must accept that where one person's right ends is where another person's right begins. So as long as you're not infringing on another person's rights, you are entitled to exercise your right to protest. And this is the reason why the Court of Appeal actually declared null and void Section 12 of the Public Order Act. Section 12 of the Public Order Act had allowed, had asked that if you want to protest, then you must seek the governor's approval prior to your protest, and then you'll be given a license to get that protest. But the Court of Appeal said no, that cannot be because it is inconsistent with sections 39 and 40 of the Constitution. And the case is the Inspector General and ANPP. In that particular case, the court said no, surely that cannot be. And what then becomes the impact on even the Police Act, on the general duties of the police in per sections 2, 4, and 24 of the Police Act, which talks about the general duties and then the powers of the police to arrest without warrant. It then says that the police must not misuse their powers. The police must not misuse their powers in arresting and detaining people in terms of, when people are exercising their right to protest, because this is a constitutional right. This is a constitutional right. And so really, to bring it home, I understand that my colleague, Mr. Abdul Salam, would try and bring forth some legislation that would seem to make us think otherwise. But the truth is, at the basis of it, if I, as a citizen, a bona fide citizen of...
Thank you very much, Mr. Majemita. Thank you for that excellent argument of the point. So I would like to invite panel B, led by, consisting of Nnamdi Orago and Adeyinka Abdulsalam, to make the contrary argument that there are limits to the right to protest. Nnamdi.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I think on this issue, we are agreed that there's a right to protest. We are agreed. There's no dispute in that regard. But the fundamental premise for our own submission will be that your right ends when mine begins. And our whole submissions will be based on section 45 of the Constitution. And let me read it as a premise. Nothing in section 37, 38, 39, 40, and 41 of this Constitution shall invalidate any law that is reasonably justifiable in a democratic society. A, in the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, or public health. B, which is our own more important premise, for the purpose of protecting the rights and freedom of other persons. There's no problem if you want to protest and stand in front of your gate with a placard. The problem is, what happens when you affect the rights of other people? What will happen when your protest affects the rights of other people? That is our premise. My colleague Yinka will make our submissions succinctly on this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agu. I think Mr. Agu has laid the perfect foundation for me to just build on. Like Mr. Agu said, the general consensus that right to protest is sacrosanct and as guaranteed under the Constitution. So we are not saying, oh, you can't protest. But what we are saying is that, is this right absolute? And we answer this in the negative, that right to protest is not absolute. Even the most sacred right, as granted under the Constitution, which is right to life, is not even absolute. So right to protest must be exercised in line with the limitations and scope as defined by the Constitution and other enabling laws. So that is the summary of our contention. So why the law seeks to protect the right of citizens? It is not to protest. It's also conscious of protecting the right of others as safeguarded under the Constitution. So when you're exercising your own right to protest, you should not infringe on my own right to liberty, for example. You should not infringe on my own right to life. You should not infringe on my own right to acquire properties and do my business. So to drive home our point, we are going to give two scenarios in form of proposal. And these are, the first one is, can 50 persons who are exercising their right to protest proceed to the airport, block the runway, and preclude thousands of people from flying because they are exercising their right to protest? This is a question that we must all answer. Another question is, can, let's say, 200 individuals proceed to a major highway, block a major highway, and stop every other person's, millions, thousands of people from making use of this highway because they're exercising their constitutional right to protest? So the question now is, is right to protest superior to right to liberty, for example, of other individuals that are being disturbed by this act of protest? So, and we just said that every right as guaranteed under the Constitution are sacrosanct. Right to protest is not superior to right to liberty. And like I said earlier, and as been held by the court in the case of Doris Bello and others against Doris, no right as guaranteed as the Constitution is absolute. The Constitution has defined the confines, the context, and limitations to these rights. So when you're exercising these rights, you must exercise the right within the context of the law. So, because as a matter of fact, right to protest is not superior to other rights as guaranteed under the Constitution. And the law is clear. We must be careful when exercising right to protest to ensure that we don't equate protest with riot. We don't equate protest with unlawful assembly. Riot, unlawful assembly are criminal conduct, liable upon conviction, if anybody is convicted under the law, for conviction for about a year imprisonment. So we should be careful. What is right to protest? In what context can we protest so that we won't fall foul of criminal legislation, penal legislation that regulate unlawful assembly and riot? So now, to make this clear, I will just quickly go to the provision of Section 44 of the Criminal Law of Lagos, which provides that define what an unlawful assembly is. So it says, where 3 or more persons with the intent to carry out some common purpose assemble in such a manner, or being assembled, conduct themselves in such a manner as to cause persons in the neighborhood to fear on reasonable grounds that persons so assembled will disturb the peace, or will try by such assembly provoke other persons to disturb the peace, they are liable for unlawful assembly. And interestingly, please, provision of subsection 2 is instructive. It said, for the purpose of subsection 1, it is immaterial that the original assembly was lawful. If being assembled, they conduct themselves with a common purpose in the manner stated in subsection 1. So it is immaterial that we have as a good intention. Oh, we came out innocently to make our voice heard. Oh, but the moment that will exculpate you from the effect of this provision. Once you cause mayhem, cause distress, cause harm, infringe on rights of others in a neighborhood, you have transformed from protest to unlawful assembly. And any person who is deemed liable under the for unlawful assembly is liable for imprisonment for a year. So let me just say that there is even a thin line between protest and riot. Section 45, for example, defines riot as when persons who unlawfully assemble together begins to act in disorderly manner as to disturb the peace, and the assembly is called a riot. So the thing is disturbed when you come together to disturb the peace of the people. So how do you disturb peace? The scenario created the other time, going to the runway of the airport to block the runway because you are protesting. Are you not disturbing the peace of others? Blocking a major highway, for example, are you not blocking, are you not disturbing, are you not infringing on the right of liberty of others to move freely? And from the definition of unlawful assembly as defined above, it is clear that people that in the name of protest block highways or infringe on the right of others, use their cars, for example, to cause obstruction, or turn the highway or major road to carnival, where they do all sorts of social activities and gathering, are guilty of the offense of unlawful assembly. That is our position. So we are not saying you can't protest, but we are saying it must be within the confines of the law. You can override the right of others. And interestingly, Section 234 of the Criminal Code provides for an offense for blocking of an highway. It is a criminal offense punishable with imprisonment for 2 years. So the question now is right to protest a license to commit crime, and does it grant immunity to people that, okay, I'm exercising my constitutional right to protest, so if I commit any crime in the process, I am immune because I have the right to protest, and we answer in the negative. We even said it is even more dangerous when exercising such right if we take into consideration the provision of Section 8 of the Criminal Code, which says when you set out for an unlawful purpose, any other crime which is committed along the line, you will be made liable for such crime as if you set out to commit the offense. Let me give an example, a very simple one. Maybe people are protesting, they block the major highway, then somebody that is going to the clinic, perhaps to give birth, was on the road, and the road was blocked, and they wouldn't allow the person access the clinic.
You have 1 minute.
Okay, so, and unfortunately, the person dies. So that is critical. The protesters, although they did not set out to kill such a person, could be liable for manslaughter or murder, as the case may be. So I just want to say quickly, before I conclude, that this issue of right to protest is not a new thing, and it is not limited to our jurisprudence and environment. Even recently this year, the Supreme Court of India, in the case of Amit Sani against Commissioner of Police, held that you can't exercise of your right to protest, you can't block the major road. So to conclude, I must say that the law outlaws and criminalizes unlawful assembly. These laws are not meant to stifle right to protest, no, but they are meant to ensure that people are able to exercise their right peacefully, and they will be able to coexist together in exercise of such rights, so that one right will not override the other, and one right will not render the right of others. Somebody in exercising his own right will not render the right of others.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So I think we've heard the two sides, the two arguments. It seems to me that both panels seem to argue that there's a right to protest, and then but that there is some conduct that could amount to riot and therefore be criminal. So the issue is, how do you distinguish between a protest and a riot? And even if you have a protest, and let's say you have a proper protest, and then other people join the protest and it becomes a riot, clearly there's a tension there. So does the government have a duty to protect proper protesters? In other words, if you are protesting, at the same time, let's use the example of the highway. If you are protesting, you need to be protected from, say, a vehicle hitting you as you go along in the protest. At the same time, you are not supposed to block the way, but if you are in a crowd, you need to be able to cross the highway without the vehicles hitting you. So, what does the government have a duty to protect protesters, and how should the tension between protecting the right to protest and then dealing with riots be balanced? I will invite panel A to address this question.
Thank you very much for the question. Let me start by saying that the two panels, like you rightly mentioned, have agreed that there's a duty and there's a right under the Constitution for people to be allowed to protest. And on this issue of the difference between protest and riot, I believe Mubo made it very clear in his argument that protest is usually peaceful and you express yourself peacefully. Riot, on the other hand, it's when it becomes, it's unruly, it's not peaceful, it becomes violent, and that's not what we're talking about here. We are saying very clearly that people have a right to express themselves peacefully. We're not talking about something that is unlawful, like panel B has tried to argue, and therefore we're saying it's lawful for people to be able to express themselves, to say, look, we want a change, we believe something is not being done right. And yes, the government has a duty to protect them when they are protesting. It is just like every other duty to, they have a duty, the government has a duty to protect all citizens. And all citizens include those who are protesting to say, we want change, we want things done in a way that will be better for the country or for us, the youth, or for this particular set of people, women or something. And there's a duty, the government, the social contract you talked about when you presented your paper, there's a social contract, for them to protect all citizens. So when there's a protest, say, for instance, they're on the road, the government should be able to send law enforcement agencies to just ensure that maybe a particular portion of the road is left open to make sure that people are able to still move around whilst the protest is going on peacefully. They should be able to ensure that, for instance, in certain situations, you may even have people who are protesting, some people are protesting for something and some against. They should be able to even make sure that they separate them. Like what you see in many countries where people are protesting, like what is happening in the US now. When the election was over, some people were protesting and some people were happy and saying very good, they were happy. The president-elect Joe Biden won. Some were protesting against it, that they wanted that there was something wrong with it. And what you could see was that there were law enforcement agents between them, ensuring that everybody had a right to express themselves. And that's what it should be. So that meant the government was protecting the protesters and allowing them to express themselves. So they do owe a duty to their citizens to protect them and to allow them to express themselves freely. And that's the only way things can work. In a democracy. In a democracy, people have a right to express themselves and to say this is how it should be done. So yes, there's a duty, and that is also enshrined in the Constitution that the government has that duty to protect its citizens. Thank you very much.
B, what is your take on this issue? Does the government have a duty to protect protesters?
For panel B, really, our position will be that if the protesters want protection, then they must act within the confines of the law. There's a Public Order Act. If you want protection from the government, take necessary steps. Get a permit. Go to the government. Go to a park where you can invite your co-protesters to join you. Go to social media. If you're under the Constitution, you have a right to, you can say that you may not have a media house, but based on the present use of social media, the Constitution allows you as well, based on that, to go to social media, criticize the government. And remember the position of Section 20, I think it's Section 22 of the Constitution, which says that public media, there's a duty on public media to use their instruments as a tool to get the government to account and be responsible for their actions. Go to social media, it's available to you. But if you want to hit the road in a protest, go to a park. Invite people who want to join in the protest to join you at the park where you interfere with nobody's rights. That is the correct approach. If you don't do that, how do you get protected by the police? How do you get protection from the police? How do you also guarantee the outcome of your actions? How do you know other people who do not share a common interest with you do not join you? Remember, my panel had said Section 8 of the Criminal Code spells it out. If you set out on an unlawful purpose, every consequence, if people join you and they start robbing, you're as guilty as they are because you set out on this unlawful purpose in the first place without a permit. Get a permit. Tell the people what are my reasons for this protest. How long will it last? Get the permit. The police will provide for you. Go to a park where you will not interfere with nobody. Stay there. Invite all the people to come and join you. Get all the musicians in the world to play with you. And people will willingly join you if you have a very good cause to lead out. And the police will be there to protect the people and their properties.
Okay.
That's
Thank
the
you.
Sorry, sorry, but now, may I say something against because the Public Order Act has been tested in court, and the Court of Appeal in IGP versus ANPP decided that it was null and void because it was inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution, Section 39 and 40 of the Constitution. Therefore, it is not right to say that you need to get a license. You don't need a license. That's what the decision decided, that it was null and void because the Constitution is a ground norm and it says you have a right. So you cannot now have another law that is lower than the ground norm to say you need to get a license. Because it therefore limits that right that has been enshrined in the Constitution. So
submit to the police, invite the police, tell the police that I'll be at this place on so and so date. Please provide me security. That's what a civil person will do.
Yes,
Okay,
I think the license in the context in which Mr. Agu used the word license is that if you require protection of police, you have to inform them. You have to tell them, I'll be here and here also so they I will need your protection, and they will be there. But we should just note that the police cannot protect commission of an illegality and a crime. So if you are blocking a major highway, from example, you are blocking a major highway, you can't expect police to come and protect you while committing the crime. Because it is a crime to block a major highway.
I think the issue has been discussed exhaustively. I think that the question is how you can maintain a balance such that the protester is protected and rioters are excluded, and that is a very sensitive issue. From the discussion and the debate, it seems quite clear that it's not a straightforward issue. First, the jurisprudence suggests that a license is not required, and the law which provided for a license has been nullified. At the same time, as you mentioned in the Police Act, the police has a duty to maintain the peace and maintain law and order. So it means that notwithstanding the fact that a license is not required, the police still has a duty to perform. And performing that duty may require more than a simple categorization that, if your protest, if rioters join your protest, then your protest is illegal. Because the question is, was there an unlawful purpose? The mere fact that you want to protest, is that unlawful? Is that an unlawful purpose? So it looks as if it requires additional skill in terms of the ability of the police to monitor. For instance, part of the job of the police, even if there is no license, it would be good for the police to have some sort of prior information of what is going on, even if you are not seeking their license. And then they will have to a police officer has to make a decision on deployment of resources. And there should be some form of negotiation or contact between the protesters and the police to negotiate certain issues. So for instance, if a highway is going to be blocked, what portion of the highway should be blocked, and then what portion will be left for people to be able to have exercise their freedom of movement, which is also guaranteed by the Constitution. These are things that can be negotiated and agreed. It's not a conflict where people are diametrically opposed. So what sort of, the question I want to pose to the panel, and if possible, I can invite other people to participate. What sort of knowledge and skills do we require on the part of our youths and our protesters, as well as on the part of our police and the government, to be able to balance to balance these two conflicting, presumably conflicting, but not really conflicting tensions between the right to protest, between preventing riots, and guaranteeing the freedom of movement of other people who are not part of the protesters. I would like to invite Isioma to comment on this question. How can skills and knowledge be improved on the part of protesters and on the part of the government to be able to resolve these tensions?
Thank you very much, sir, and good afternoon, everyone who is joining us in this webinar today. I think this is actually the most pertinent question as we review the recent protests that have happened in Nigeria and the the fallout of those actions. The first thing I would like to say is I'm glad that we all agree that every citizen of Nigeria has a guaranteed right that is guaranteed under the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to protest. However, I would have to agree with panel B that every right that you have guaranteed under the Constitution is limited by the rights of other persons which are also guaranteed under the Constitution. And so to your question, sir, how do protesters, understanding these bigger constitutional concepts, go ahead to exercise their right to protest effectively? I think that the first issue is the issue of trust. There is a fundamental distrust between protesters and I would say the wider Nigerian citizenry and the government and vice versa. And there has to be dialogue. If we review what has happened with the recent NSAS protest, there were critical points in that process where there were opportunities for dialogue between the protesters and government, which could have potentially prevented some of the unfortunate incidences that followed subsequently. And there has to be some sort of fora or openness to dialogue. And this requires both parties to extend olive branches to the other. There has to be more trust between the citizens and their police and the police and the citizens. So if someone comes to the police station and they are notifying you as the authority that has been given the constitutional responsibility to protect lives and properties, including their lives and properties as they go about to exercise their fundamental human rights, you need to be open to that and to dialogue. And a good example of this breakdown of trust between citizens and government is with what has happened with Sheun Kuti and his assembly, which he tried to do at the shrine, and he got the letter from the government, from the police, telling him not to go ahead with that, and essentially was, some sort of threat. You see, those types of mannerisms need to change. And one way to change that is by education. And I'm glad that Punuka is doing this webinar today, because I think for a lot of protesters, people don't really understand, these constitutional issues, where their rights stop and where their rights end. and how to go about protesting in a way that is legal. But I think I would also end my comments with a statement, which is that civil disobedience has always been a successful tool of protest in itself. And so the question is, in trying to be law abiding, in carrying out your protest, do we, what is the line of being law abiding and, having necessary civil disobedience that could further the, the points that the
protest
protesters
agenda.
are seeking
Yeah.
exactly to
Thank
make?
you. Thank you very much. Thank you for raising that question. I think if I got the point that you're making, that the police is not your enemy, as it were, and the police is also there to protect even the protesters, but the absence of trust is part of the challenge. So clearly, it seems that both the police have to change their policing techniques, and the protesters have to also understand the limits, because it seems that many people make an assumption that uh, protesting is an unlimited activity. But from the discussion today, it's not unlimited. In fact, the act of proper protesting is a managerial challenge. It's a challenge where you have to manage different issues. At the end of the day, like any managerial challenge, you must succeed at the end. It's not, you have an agenda for your protest, which is to change a particular policy, to change whatever situation you want to change. And so your protest must achieve it. If your protest cannot achieve that objective, you have failed as a manager. So you have to make sure that you are not distracted from that objective, and that the protest is focused on that objective. And that means that you have to recognize the stakeholders that you have to engage with. And it's not, it shouldn't be a war between you and the rest of the society. So you can't on the one hand be complaining, for instance, about a particular wrong, and then from some of the presentations made today, you are creating another wrong, because, for instance, you are depriving other people of their right of freedom of movement, because let's say, for instance, you block a highway. That is a clear situation where you could manage with the police to say, okay, this is the deal. We need sufficient, because of our numbers, right? Not because we want to block the highway, but because of our numbers. The number of people we are expecting is 20,000, and the place that we can congregate effectively is here. Therefore, we would have to block 4 lanes, and then you do a deal with the police. There'll be 3 lanes left. People will be moving about. That is where, you are working as a country, as one nation, one group of people for one purpose. Every stakeholder is important, and every stakeholder has a place within the system, and the system is working in that manner. And then there will be constant communication between the leaders of the protest and the police, making sure that any issue that comes up is managed and dealt with, so you can focus on the policy issue and not be distracted by other people who don't understand the policy issue, and don't understand your agenda, and may have more selfish interests they want to protect, and those interests become riotous, and then there is now a sort of fine line between the protest and pure criminal activity. Now, so I just want to again share my slide to just talk about some of the some of the issues, that arise here. The issue of nation building. The issue of nation building. How do we build a nation, particularly where you have different peoples, different tribes, ethnic groups, language, religion, etc. We Norman said that nation building is a challenge. It's a challenge because people have different perceptions, and you are trying to put within a structure. We have built a structure. So there's a constitution which has been adopted, which says there will be states, there will be local government, there will be a national government. But, but this is imposed upon pre-existing divisions of language, of religion, of ethnicity. So to now turn this, so basically you have different nations and then you are trying to create one nation from it. According to Norman, it's extremely very challenging. And I think that it's important that protesters understand that complexity, that the country is still in the process of nation building. It's also very important for the government to understand the sensitivity that it itself is in the process of nation building. So, and there is a constitutional obligation to improve the life of the people. The entire chapter 2 of the Constitution imposes an obligation on government to improve the lives of Nigerians. And so, although I did say that at the beginning that there is a social contract, right? And that under the social contract theory, that government obligation is only limited to protection of property life. But the truth is that under our constitution, the obligation is more than protection of life. Although others will argue with you, could argue that chapter 2 is not justiciable. So it's an aspiration. Now, but I would say that whether chapter 2 is an aspiration or not, the reality is that it is practically an obligation that the government has to meet. And for instance, that chapter 2 was used to justify the Independent Corrupt Practices Act because there was no provision under the exclusive legislative list that gave the National Assembly the power to legislate on corruption, on anti-corruption. But the Supreme Court in the Attorney General of Ondo State against Attorney General of the Federation held that under Chapter 2, to eliminate corruption, National Assembly could pass a law. So it means that, for instance, all the other rights there, the right to social benefits, the right to housing, the right to improvement, etc., the right to development of the people and the youth can be translated into reality by legislation and other actions of government. Now, what has the government done in this regard? They usually have national development plans, some of which I've mentioned here, etc. But they haven't been so successful, but yes, they have these development plans from time to time. And a group of writers led by Saint made this comment about Nigeria. He said, Nigeria is Africa's sleeping giant with strong culture of industry, creativity, and initiative, but where such talents are used to the wrong ends. And this is an assessment of our country. So what do we do to make sure that our industry, our creativity, and our initiatives are redirected to the to the right ends, And when you look at all this creativity, industry, and initiative that we have, and you compare it, you're looking at the World Bank report of 1996, compare it to other countries, it's not translating to real development in the sense that, if you remember what I said earlier, that the real development that will come, the biggest thing the government can do to solve most of the problem is investment in human capital, in our people. But if you look at it, you would find that for Nigeria has 15 scientists to 1 million Nigerians. Brazil has 168 scientists to 1 million. China has 459. India 158. The United States 4,103 of every 1 million people is a scientist, engineer, etc. And these are indexes. And when you then look at the development, you will find that the biggest economy in the world is US, followed by China. So the more scientists we produce, the more engineers we produce, the more likelihood that we'll be able to achieve development. And when we achieve development, there will be, let me put it that way, there will be, it's not that in America they still have protests, right? But there will be protest that is not based on poverty and development issues, but that is based on policy and other new aspirations, let's put it that way. So, and that will generate much less tension in our country. So, of course, there's usually conflicts in the, if you can see that there are conflicts in the modernization objectives and the strategy for utilization of education as the means of spurring development. And this is an observation, again, by experts who have looked at our system. Now, of course, we can go into details as to using education as the basis that, there should be more access to education. We should change our teaching and learning. Part of the problem is where those that are coming out of the system are not job ready. Okay, we are teaching, producing people who have no relevance in the economy. Let's put it that way. Then your education strategy is not tied to your development strategy. Now we are building a lot of railways, which is excellent. But the question you just have to ask yourself is, first, we are building them using foreign engineers, which is not necessarily bad. But what will be bad is, what is the plan in the next 4, 5, 6, 10 years to make sure that we produce sufficient engineers, traffic engineers, and all sorts of people that will run this railway and then build the next set of railways. So that's really the challenge, of where you want to make sure that your higher education strategy is tied to your development strategy. And then that would remove a lot of the protest and move them to more policy issues rather than the mundane issue of bread and butter, let's put it that way. So, of course, there's inadequate funding around education. And as I've shown here, mostly education is really at the heart of many of these protest issues. Not just in terms of the lack of skills, but in terms of even, for instance, knowledge of the limits of protest and the need to have coordination, and there is real management issue and those other challenges. So there's, and that says that, even this, when you talk about protests, it should be part of civic education from primary school. So people know from primary school what is involved in protest, the pros and the cons, and how you do it, and how you make your voice heard, and who the stakeholders are, and how you should distinguish between your protest and riot, and what you need to do to make sure your protest doesn't become a riot, and how you must make sure that your voices are heard. There are other aspects that have been mentioned about civil disobedience, whether that is a strategy. Yeah, it depends on what you mean by civil disobedience. It could be boycott, stay at home. All those are forms of protest, So, and those are civil disobedience. But also, you have representatives. You have representatives in the National Assembly and State Assembly. They are not held sufficiently accountable by the people. So that's also another means. There is election, but there's, how many people go to constituency offices? How many people write to their representatives? by the time their representatives begin to receive thousands and thousands of letters, how many people know the name of their representative in the National Assembly? How many people phone them? How many people go to their constituency office? So these are, and that's why there's a disconnect between your elected representatives under the social contract theory, that yes, although you have ceded your right to use violence to the state, in return for the state protecting you, at the same time, you elected representatives who should be your watchdog over the structure of the state because of the violence which the structure of the state controls. So those representatives, how accountable are they to you, and how do you ensure that they remain accountable to you, either through effective participation in elections and then effective monitoring of their activities post-election? So, I mean, again, I always want to go back to education, because I think that if we sort out the education part, we could solve the other issues. But these are some of the challenges with respect to education. I don't want to go through it. And how do we overcome it? Again, good leadership, but not just good leadership, but good followership, which is what we are talking about today. Protesting is one of the signs of good followership, but it's more than that. Civil disobedience is part of it, but it is more than that. Participation in elections is one of it, but it's more than that. Holding your representatives, who are the ones guarding this government that you have created by virtue of the social contract, to make sure that the government does not abuse the privileges, is another one, but it's not the only one. So if you get the leadership right, and what I mean by the leadership is both the leadership and the followership, then you can focus the government on consistent national development policy. So the education strategy will then follow the development agenda. We will emphasize on our comparative advantage as a nation and key professions and not jack of all trades. So if you take some other countries, let's say you take India, they focus on software and things like that. They focus on their area of comparative advantage. So we have to look at what is our area of comparative advantage in terms of education and in terms of knowledge. And then where should we make an impact in the world? Where is it that we direct, channel all the creative energies of our people too, so that we become the experts of the world, where people come, to get those resources, So, of course, in terms of our education, we improve on the hours index in terms of our teaching, etc. So that's where the Open University is the government really need to invest more in the Open University, because not everybody will be able to go to the regular university. But the Open University, the student loan, the endowment systems can ensure that we bring higher education to the highest number of people. But we should not focus only on higher education. Vocational education is so important. Look, but majority of the people, how come we don't have good mechanics? Trained mechanics. We don't have trained masons, bricklayers, and people like that, who are very well trained, very well protected, and that is the bulk of our people. And if those people are happy, and these are the people who didn't go to university, but they have a trade or the other, if they are happy, the government will be happy, and everybody else in Nigeria will be happy. And so these are the sort of those are the people we need to focus on. And then the issue of the brain drain, which is a major challenge. Everybody wants to leave. Everybody wants to andro from Nigeria. Everybody wants to go. All our youths are not happy. Everybody wants to travel. Some kill themselves trying to cross the sea, and the rest. So we need to actually have a policy for brain circulation and reversal for people to come back. China implemented things like that. It requires strong collaboration, affiliation with local foreign institutions, but then setting policies that would allow them to come. I mean, we can't discuss all of it here, but there are policies that can be adopted that will result in a brain reversal where Nigerians will begin to come back, invest in productive activities in Nigeria. We need to emphasize the part of the problem is you are seeing is that there's a gap between these so-called haves and the don't have. We need to bridge that gap, particularly in education. And because a situation where it's only some people who can go to private schools, some people will go to university because they can afford it, some people cannot. It's just a system where you start to have a class system is a recipe for disaster. And you see it explode in form of, you know, you are trying to have a protest, which we have said is a legal activity, but then you find this riot where some people come and join them, and then a normal, clear, lawful protest becomes a riot. Now, it's because of a gap, the socio-economic status gap. That is the problem between those people who see the protest as opportunity to steal and riot and cause confusion, and those who so-called educated, you know, is showing the class gap that is existing in the system. So bridging that class gap is essential to solving this problem. So enforcement of free and compulsory education for all children up to the age of 12. A decrease in the gender inequality through increase in inclusive education is important. This IMF, report. And then a compulsory adult education and skill acquisition for adults. So for instance, I see the certain policies. Let's say you have the market money program or any social, if you have any social program, part of the requirement should be that those people should be involved in adult education. So adult education should be made compulsory so that the worst thing is to have a whole man, you know, with no skill. And the man needs to eat a certain amount of food every day just to survive. And that person has to get that food somehow, right? And if with no skill, and it doesn't matter, even if the person is already 30 years old, if there's an investment in education at 30 and you look at lifespan increasing, that person is going to probably live till 70, 80 years today from what is happening, right? So it's better to train that person at 30 years and then the person has a skill to feed himself than that person waking up every day and has to find something to eat with no skill. And that means stealing and, you know, committing all sorts of crimes here and there. And then the person is going to do it for 50 years. I mean, it's just going to drain the system. So very, very important. So we have to rethink our vocational education and training, need to change value systems, restore dignity of labor. The idea that everybody wants to be a doctor and lawyer, you know, nobody wants to stain their hands with oil and the rest. Those value systems have to be a change. We should not just emphasize vocational, professional training, but also vocational subjects. And we need to give more prominence to this. Again, funding of public and private sectors should change in orientation. A lot of people don't, a lot of people who have made it, immediately they make it, they forget. And I'm not talking about government, I'm talking of private people who have made it, they never give back. Those who went to university know that it's because they went to university, they were able to make it. The training they got either as accountants or they became stockbrokers, they became bankers, they never give back to the university. They never give back. They never give back to education in Nigeria. But when you go abroad, you see people understand this issue. They understand that their success was directly tied to the benefits they got from education. And they give back. Our people don't give back. They accumulate and accumulate. They accumulate for children themselves who will not be able to use this money properly. So, and it's all wasted. Whereas they could have put it into the system to produce the next set of people who preserve the wealth again for the general people. So I think that there's a lot that needs to change in terms of our orientation. And there should be regulation and enforcement of standards in what is called dirty work. Like anybody can be a bricklayer, anybody can be a contractor in Nigeria without any standard. You can't do that in Ghana. In Ghana, you can't say you are a bricklayer, you can't say you are a mason if you didn't have training. And we need to change our culture and emphasize STEM culture. STEM is about the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. STEM, that is it. That's what we need to emphasize. That's the future. You talk about tech, you talk about fintech, you talk about all the things that where we can have relative advantage today and leapfrog the country and keep our youth very busy. This is what we'll be talking about, developing a STEM culture. There are some funds like the PTDF fund, the TED fund, they should be focused. I see that I've seen some people who went to go and do PhD in arbitration, sponsored by PTDF, TED fund. Look, I'm not saying that, look, I'm an arbitrator and I'm not saying arbitration is not important, but please, for Nigerian government to be sponsoring somebody to go and do PhD in arbitration with our PTDF fund and our TED fund, it is absolutely wrong. They should only sponsor STEM subjects. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Sorry, sir, it's actually been updated to STEAM to include arts and culture. STEAM is now STEAM.
Well, to tell you the truth, I believe that arts and culture will do very well on its own. But I'm saying that the arts and culture is very important because we have creative abilities, right? But STEM is the foundation for engineering, manufacturing, competitive advantage. Then the arts and culture will come on top of it. So for me, the emphasis is on the science, essentially. And then they should form STEM clubs, where there's emphasis on apprenticeship, on articleship, and things like that. Of course, eliminate cultural and gender impediments. These are just some of my own ideas about strategy, how we can do it. Let's just listen to
enter university many times and I failed 3 times. I never thought in my dream to become a PhD and a holder. But I didn't work very hard. I just failed examinations again and again. And my story tells that those people work very hard, but failed again and again. Don't give up. Someday, a great university like Hong Kong University is waiting for you. Real entrepreneurs not only know how to make money, but how to spend money. And we do not live for money. We do not work for money. When you have 1 million, that is your money. When you have 10 million, maybe the problem comes. When you have $100 million, I think that is not your money. That's the trust the society gives it to you. That they believe you can spend the money better. You can use the money better. The real business people make the money by solving the social problems for the others. Among all the challenges, I think the most challenging thing is about education. Even if today the best university of the world will face the same challenges, because everything we teach our kids, the things that the past 200 years, the things we taught them, the machine will do better. So we have to think about what the best way, what are the contexts to teach our kids in the future. We have to teach the kids. These are my things. Machine will never be able to win the match. This is my belief, because machine only have the chips, human have the heart. So I think we have to change from now the education system. In the future, it's not about the competition of knowledge. It's a competition of creativity. It's a competition of imagination. It's a competition of learning. It's a competition of independent thinking. If you think like a machine, the problem will come. For 20 years, we'll make people like a machine. In the next 20 years, machine will look. So in the future, it's not knowledge-driven, it's the wisdom-driven. It's the experience-driven. So in the past, it's the knowledge-driven, and it's the manufacturer-driven, and in the future, it's the creativity-driven. So this is what we think the world should be focusing on.
Thank you. So, thank you so much. I think as you have heard from Jack Ma, it's Jack Ma is the founder of Alibaba. Alibaba is the equivalent of the Amazon of China. A huge impact around the world. You know, what he's saying is that we need to release the creative energy of our people in different areas, whether it's art, culture, science, technology, engineering, etc., because that's what will make them to be able to compete in the future. So how do we know whether we are working towards the target of youth engagement and development in line with the national and global development agenda for the youth? Stegley is, former IMF, yeah, he led this commission, measurement of economic performance and social progress. And they said, himself and Futusi, those attempting to guide the economy and our societies are like a pilot trying to steer without a reliable compass. We are almost blind when the metrics on which action is based are ill-designed and when they are not well understood. So it's so important that we always measure the metrics. We always know where we are going to, and we fly towards that using a reliable compass. And I think that having a development agenda and then having a good education strategy will enable us to overcome many of these challenges and ensure that protests will be focused on policy and the gap between the haves and don't haves that result in that problem of the blurring between protest and riot will be eliminated and will be focused on our main agenda, which is to develop our youth and to develop our country. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think we have slightly exceeded our time. I will just call on panel A for concluding thoughts and then panel B for concluding thoughts. And we end this. Thank you very much.
Sir, there are some questions in the Q&A section.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to say that clearly from all that we have discussed, the right to protest is enshrined in the Constitution. However, indeed, actually, much as we did argue, and we do believe it's a right, but there are limits. We also would like to say that these limits, should be respected, and that one of the ways is what our senior partner Anthony Digwe has talked about. We all should get involved. It's not only about the government. We should ensure that we do our own part in educating people. The civic education that he talked about is something that should be started from primary school, so people even understand the Constitution of Nigeria, know what to do and what not to do. People become also loyal and how would I put it, educated as to what is right and what is not right, and all sides of the divide, not just people, the citizens, the people in the police, the government, so they know what to do and limits, because everybody has limits for those who are protesting, limits for those who are trying to ensure that it's peaceful and it's lawful. So civic education, I think, it's what we'll be recommending, and we also believe that everybody should play their part. It's not only the government. We should also help with our fundings for those who have done better than others to provide a level as much as possible playing ground, so that even when people are protesting, those who want to join will not be joining with a different agenda, but they will join actually to actually project and enforce the policy, and not an alternative unlawful or violent agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, panel B.
Civic education is critical. I think everybody must get actively involved in the political process. If you want change, there's a procedure for change, and you must get involved. Don't sit back and expect things to just happen participate, demand accountability based on constitution from a political office holders, as has been stated already. I think that is critical. And if you have to protest, plan. Plan is a management matter, really, as stated. You must plan adequately. You must plan for the possible consequence. You must plan for what can possibly happen. You must plan to know when to stop. And you must plan to know when you don't cross the lines of what a reasonable protest should be. That way, you're sure that your objectives, which are clearly defined from the onset, are achieved. But most critical of all is the fact that to change a system, you must take part. You cannot change a system by merely passing comments by the side. You must engage in the process. You must demand accountability and responsibility from government by engaging them directly, following the due and legal process, for instance, or even on the basic principles of what they ought to give you. Demand those things from them directly, first and foremost. And where that fails, participate directly in the process as well. I think that's all we intend to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There are some very interesting questions here. One attendee asked the question, if a protest doesn't cause some form of discomfort in the form of blocking of major roads, for example, in a place like Nigeria, is there any guarantee that it will be listened to at all? That's a very interesting question. Now, what I would say is this, of course you want your protest to be heard. That's the whole purpose, right? You want your protest to be heard. However, I asked the question whether if you looked at say a place like Nigeria, if you block the road and the response from the state, for instance, is maybe some say a response that now changes the focus from protest to riot or crime. Does that, has the protester actually achieved its objective, in the sense that nobody's talking again about the subject of or the policy issue you want to fight, but they are talking now about whether crime has been committed or who committed it, whether it's the police or whether it's the rioters. So, and whether the rioters are the same as the protesters. So if you look at it, you would find that even in a place like Nigeria, protest requires a bit of management and employment of management skill on the part of the protesters so that it is not hijacked or diverted. And the reality is this, whether you want to believe it or not, there is an SES gap, that is a socio-economic status gap that is very glaring in Nigeria, And so just understand that each time there's a protest, you have this set of people who may not see it in the same light that you are seeing it. So you have to manage it. So when you are having a protest, you must always bear in mind. For instance, I participate in a protest annually. It's a protest that it's for the unborn child, but it's very well organized. We usually walk from one designated place to another designated place, all in a particular uniform, carrying placard. But we are talking about the issue of abortion, anti-abortion protest, right? And we work, and we have LASMA, we have, the road safety, we have police escort, and we stay by the side of the road. Usually we go through, we do usually up to 5 kilometers and go, we have speeches at where we start from, and then speeches are where we end. Yes, vehicles will be going past us and the rest, probably don't without noticing us, but we usually would then have media people, they take pictures and it comes out in the newspaper. Now, is it making an impact? Maybe not, I'm not sure. But the point is that we do that every year. That's the commitment. So it's not like this is new, right? It's for the protesters to know what the facts are and what the social reality is, that because of that gap that is existing in the system, which government needs to do something to fill up the gap. Each time you go out to protest, if you don't manage it very well, those people will come, and you lose control of your protest, and you may lose control of your objective. So another question says, how then beyond this inter-conversation can we ensure that citizens are well educated on such rights? What systematic frameworks can be put in place to achieve this? I want to hope that that has been answered. And we have another question from Kate Osamo. Kate is a parliamentarian in the UK Parliament. We welcome her. Thank you so much for the honor of attending our webinar. And she asks, if the government refuses the permit, do you think the protesters should not peacefully gather? Well, the truth is, I think as one of the panels have explained, that that has been declared illegal. They don't require permit in order to gather under Nigerian law. However, because there is a risk that their gathering could affect the rights of others, as we have suggested, it's a management issue. You may need to work with the police to make sure that those rights are balanced and you can have your protest without interfering too much with the rights of other people. So it's a management issue. Now, another attendee asked, does the Nigerian police actually know what the rights of protesters are? Because I'm struggling to understand why Sheon Kuti was given that letter when he wanted to carry out his activities in his own facility, not infringing on the rights of anyone. What can we do to ensure that the police don't act outside their rights? Because it seems they can do anything they want to do without restriction. Well, it's not exactly correct that the police can do anything they want to do without restriction. As you have been told of the decision of the court that says you don't require police permit in order to protest. However, what I will always say is that luckily we have the courts, which is another institution under the social contract rights, that was, social contract theory that was set up. The courts are there, although part of government, just like also the National Assembly is part of government, but they are there to control the abuse of the powers of the state by the government. So that's part of the duties of the court. And they are there where there's a dispute between the citizens and the state. They are there to mediate and adjudicate, rather. So if there's any issue, if you want to challenge, if the police, hopefully, if they need to change and understand that it's a partnership between them and the people. But if they take a position, they are entitled to take a position. And if you don't agree with it, I suggest you go to court to challenge it. And then the court will resolve that issue and will build the jurisprudence, and everybody will be guided on it. There's a comment here, inclusivity is the best way to orient the moral compass. Yeah, I agree with that. Do protesters, Abacha Bulama has the question, do protesters have the right to force other members of the public to join them on the protest? Well, I think that's what we've been discussing, that there is a limit to the right of a protester. That the protester cannot, I think the different panels have made the point that whilst you have the right to protest, but it stops where the rights of other people start. And you can't force people to join your protest. It's wrong. And that's where you need that balance. You can't block a road 100%. You know, you need a balance. They should have negotiated with the police so that the impact of their protest is minimized in some way. while still making the impact, according to one of the questions, one of the comments, that somehow you have to make sure you have impact. But having the impact is an issue of creativity. It's an issue of your ingenuity, of the different techniques and the mix. And the idea that a protest is the only solution is not correct. As has been said, you can have a series of protests. It can be planned. For instance, I tell you, in Canada, if you protest and you protest consistently for a time, the parliament will pass a law. Under that law, they will ban your ability to protest. And you must obey that law passed saying that you should not protest. And if you protest, you will not breach that law, and then they will charge you. And usually the unions will obey it. When they will protest to the extent that the law will be passed, then they'll say, oh, because the law has been passed, they can't protest anymore. So they will stop, but the assembly has to pass the law. So there are lots of things that can be done, and you can have a technique of say, okay, we protest for 1 week and stop, then we do civil disobedience, and you have an agenda for a whole year to pursue a particular policy change. Then you can have the impact to do protest or riot that has that you can't manage and becomes a riot. You actually fail because you don't achieve your policy agenda. Okay, thank you very much. I think we have exhausted our time. We thank all the participants. We are really very grateful for your coming, and we wish you the rest of excellent days. We'll continue the conversation, and would communicate by email and other means. Thank you. And also this will be uploaded to our website, so you can always watch it whenever you want. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.